My father stood beneath gold retirement banners, smiling beside a crystal award while I held the sealed envelope. That could save my pension. My name was Elena Ward. I was 48 years old, still in my pale blue nurse uniform, fresh from a 12-hour shift at St. Agnes Hospital. I had antiseptic in my sleeves. I had other people's pain sitting heavy in my bones. Across the Marlowe Grand Ballroom, Harrison Ward smiled like a man who had never stolen a thing. He was 72. He wore a navy suit with silver cufflinks. He stood beside Lionel Price, who held that crystal award like it was sacred. Nearly 200 guests watched my father with soft admiration. Then he lifted the microphone. He looked past the center tables. He found me near the rear, and he said, with that polished courtroom authority I had trusted my whole life, "Some people need protection from themselves." I kept one hand on the sealed hospital records envelope. I did not move. What none of them knew yet was that the envelope in my hand carried the first crack in the story he had built around me. They did not know I had already seen the account. They did not know I had already heard the recording. They did not know my brother's black leather briefcase held the second proof. And before dessert was served, everyone in that room would understand exactly why I was done being protected. Sometimes saying it plainly was the first step toward getting free. And if this story stays with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember that. Boundaries are not betrayal. What happens next changes everything. Stay to the end. You don't want to miss how this lands. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from, then we continue the story. They are protection. That was the strange thing about being betrayed by someone powerful. The room did not feel dangerous at first. It felt expensive. It felt calm. It smelled like lemon polish, white flowers, and champagne. The Marlowe Grand Ballroom had gold banners draped from balcony railings, each one printed with my father's name, and the words, "Lifetime Service." The tables were covered in white cloth. The forks were lined up perfectly. The glasses had been filled before anyone sat down. People spoke in low voices, the careful voices used around money, donors, and old judges. My father had built a life where people lowered their tone for him. He had been a retired judge. He had been a wealthy donor. He had been a hospital benefactor. He had been called fair, firm, generous, wise. That night, he was being honored for public trust. I had spent the day at St. Agnes Hospital nurses' station under fluorescent lights, answering call bells, checking medication times, charting pain levels, and reminding myself to breathe. Teresa Collins had looked at me near the end of my shift. She was 57, with a red lanyard badge reel that swung when she leaned against the counter. She said, "You still going?" I nodded. I tried to make it sound simple. "I have to." Teresa did not soften things that needed edges. She said, "Then keep your face still and your papers close." I carried that with me. Keep your face still. Keep your papers close. That was why I had not changed clothes. Part of me had not had time. Part of me wanted the room to see me exactly as I was. A nurse, a widow, a daughter, a woman who had worked for every dollar they were about to pretend she could not handle. I had not been seated with family. That detail landed before any speech did. My name card was not near Harrison Ward. It was not near Malcolm Ward. It was not at the table with the silver-trimmed place cards and the better wine. I was placed near the rear, not the last table because that would have looked cruel, just far enough away to make distance look like seating logistics. I knew that kind of cruelty. It wore gloves. I found my chair beside a pillar half blocked from the stage. From there, I could see my father's profile. I could see the clean line of his jaw. I could see his silver cufflinks every time he raised his hand. I could see Malcolm Ward, my older brother, near the side aisle. He was 53. His black leather briefcase sat beside his chair. He did not look at me. Not once. That hurt more than I wanted it to. Malcolm had been my older brother before he had been a lawyer. Before he learned to speak in cautions and conditions. Before he started saying things like, "Elena, you need to be careful how this looks." For most of my life, he had stood between me and Harrison Ward when our father's voice turned cold. Then grief changed the room. Money changed it more. Or maybe money only showed me what had already been there. Lionel Price stepped to the microphone first. He was 68, steady, ceremonial, polished in the way people became when they had introduced too many important men. The crystal award rested in both his hands. It caught the ballroom lights and threw small white sparks across his sleeve. He smiled at the crowd. "Tonight," he said, "we honor a man whose life has been defined by service, honor, stewardship, and public's trust." People nodded. Some lifted their glasses before the toast even came. Public trust. I remembered those words because my fingers tightened on the envelope at the exact moment he said them. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, sealed by hospital records. The official stamp across the flap was slightly uneven. I could still remember the copier room heat from that afternoon. Not because the envelope was warm anymore. It was not, but because my body had stored that feeling. The hum of the machine, the dry paper smell, the way the edge of the envelope bent against my palm when I saw the name inside. Dr. Priya Nair. Her name was tied to the medical affidavit my father had used to make me look unfit. I was not ready to open that part of the story in the ballroom. Not yet. Naomi Bell had been very clear. Naomi was 39. She had a green legal pad and a way of speaking that made panic feel inefficient. She had said, "Do not argue feelings when dates can speak." I had written that down, not because I did not understand it, because I knew I would forget it once I saw my father. I knew he could still make me feel 12 years old with one pause, one disappointed breath, one hand on my shoulder in public while he took something from me in private. That was the training I carried into that ballroom. Stay quiet. Do not embarrass the family. Do not make powerful men uncomfortable. Do not confuse pain with evidence. But that night I had evidence, not all of it in my hand, not all of it ready for the room, but enough that his voice no longer sounded like truth. Lionel Price continued. He spoke about my father's years on the bench. He spoke about principled decisions. He spoke about civic duty. He spoke about donations to St. Agnes Hospital. He spoke about scholarship funds, advisory boards, legal mentorship. He spoke about Harrison Ward as if the man had been carved from restraint and duty. I watched people believe him. That was its own kind of violence. Not loud, not bloody, just the slow erasing of what I knew. The hospital administrators near the front smiled at the right moments. Board members touched napkins to their mouths. Old colleagues leaned toward each other with fond memories. The room had dressed my father in honor before he even opened his mouth. I sat near the rear and touched the envelope again. The paper had softened at the corners from being carried. I had checked for it in the car. I had checked for it in the elevator. I had checked for it at the coat table. I had checked for it after I walked into that ballroom and saw where they had seated me. I did not trust the world to leave me with proof. Not anymore. There was a framed photo near the guest book. Harrison Ward in his navy suit, Malcolm beside him. Me on the other side in a black dress from years earlier. David stood behind me, one hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The worn wedding band on David Ward's hand caught the light in that photograph. I saw it when I walked in. I almost stopped breathing. David had died 18 months before that gala. He had been 50. After his funeral, I sat in a room that smelled like cold coffee and funeral flowers while Harrison Ward told me not to worry about paperwork. He placed his hand over mine. I remembered the pressure. Heavy, warm, certain. He said, "Let me handle the hard things." And I let him. Because grief had made me soft in places I used to protect. Because I was working shifts again before I could sleep through the night. Because pension statements, insurance forms, bank notices, and beneficiary letters looked like another language. After the funeral. Because when a father offers to carry something after your husband dies, you want to believe it is love. I wanted to believe it was love. That was the part people never understood. I did not hand him my life because I was foolish. I handed him a stack of papers because I was broken. And he knew the difference. He knew exactly when to ask. The first papers were ordinary enough. At least they looked ordinary to a grieving nurse who had not slept. A pension survivor benefit packet, a life insurance claim, a brokerage account transfer, a hospital credit union form, a temporary authorization so my father could speak to David's former employer. I signed where he placed the yellow tabs. I signed at my kitchen table. I signed with a pen from David's cardiologist's office. I signed while Harrison said, "This is only to simplify things." He said it 3 times. Only to simplify things. That phrase became the door he walked through with my money in his hands. For the first few months, I did not notice. I was too tired to notice much beyond my next shift and the quiet side of the bed. My direct deposit still came in. My rent still cleared. My groceries still scanned. My father sent occasional updates in a tone that made questions feel childish. "Everything is stable. Do not concern yourself. I reviewed it. Your brother agreed. When I asked for copies, he said he had already sent them. When I said I had not received them, he said grief made memory unreliable. When I asked again, he sighed like I had disappointed him. You always were suspicious when frightened. I believed him long enough to hate myself for asking. That was how control worked in my family. It did not arrive shouting. It arrived as competence. It arrived with a folder. It arrived with a father who knew judges, bankers, trustees, hospital donors, and lawyers. It arrived while I was too sad to see the cage. The first real sign came on August 7th, 2023. I had gone to the credit union near St. Agnes to move $1,200 from savings to checking. My car needed repairs. The teller was a young woman named Alyssa Grant. She was 31. She had a silver nose stud and a cautious professional smile. She typed my account number. Then she stopped. Not dramatically, just a small pause. Her eyes moved from the screen to me, then back again. She said, Mrs. Ward, I need a manager. I remember the sound of the printer behind her. I remember the old man depositing a check at the next window. I remember my own face reflected faintly in the plexiglass. I said, is something wrong? Alyssa lowered her voice. There is a restriction on external movement. I did not understand. What restriction? She looked uncomfortable. It says protected account access. The words hit me wrong. Protected. Again, that word. I said, I am the account holder. She said, yes, ma'am. But she did not move the money. A manager came out. He was polite. Too polite. He brought me into a side office with frosted glass walls. He said there was a conservatorship notation. I thought he had mistaken me for someone else. I laughed once. It came out dry. There is no conservatorship. He looked at the screen and then at me with the careful pity people used when they believed a person did not understand their own legal status. He said, I can provide the filing reference. That was the first moment my grief became fear. The filing reference led me to the county clerk. The county clerk led me to a sealed guardianship docket. The docket led me to Naomi Bell. I found Naomi through Teresa Collins. Teresa had watched me try not to shake in the break room. I had told her only the smallest piece. My father may have filed something without telling me. Teresa did not ask whether I was sure. She did not ask what I had done to provoke it. She said, my cousin used Naomi Bell for elder financial abuse. Call her. That was the first kindness that did not require me to prove I deserved it. Naomi's office sat above a bakery on 8th Street. The hallway smelled like sugar, coffee, and old carpet. I brought every paper I had, a tote bag full of statements, 3 envelopes from David's employer, a credit union denial slip, a printed email from my father that said, do not create unnecessary conflict while I am trying to preserve you. Naomi read quietly. She did not interrupt me. She did not perform outrage. She highlighted dates. She circled names. She made a timeline on her green legal pad. March 14th, 2023, petition filed. March 22, 2023, temporary order granted. April 2, 2023, medical affidavit signed. April 6, 2023, notice returned unclaimed. April 11, 2023, control order expanded. May 3, 2023, pension account restricted. June 12, 2023, 6/12/480 transferred into Ward Family Protective Trust. When she wrote that number, my mouth went dry. $612,480. That was not just money. That was David's pension survivor benefit. That was my retirement security. That was every night shift I had worked while telling myself I would not be alone forever. That was the future I had been too heartbroken to protect. Naomi tapped the page once. Who created the trust? I said, my father. She looked down again. And who was trustee? I knew before she said it. Harrison Ward. She nodded. And successor trustee? I swallowed. Malcolm? She nodded again. Then she turned the paper so I could see. The trust named Harrison Ward as sole trustee, Malcolm Ward as successor trustee, Peter Voss as counsel. I had seen Peter's name on family paperwork before. He had handled my father's estate planning. He had handled my mother's probate. He had handled the sale of my childhood home. He had always been there when something became legal before I understood it had become personal. Naomi said, this is not a misunderstanding. I stared at her. She did not soften. She said, this was a system. That sentence changed me, not all at once. But something inside me stopped trying to make my father innocent. Naomi requested the full guardianship file. The court released part of it after she filed a motion for access and review. The first time I saw the petition, I felt sick. Not because it was complicated, because it was intimate. It described me as emotionally erratic, financially confused, vulnerable to undue influence, unable to manage assets after bereavement. It used words that sounded medical without feeling true. It mentioned missed mail, late responses, and episodes of disorganized speech. I had missed mail because I was working double shifts. I had responded late because my husband had died. I had cried in a bank lobby once because the clerk asked whether David was available to sign. My father had turned grief into evidence. That was the first betrayal. The second betrayal was the affidavit. It was labeled St. Agnes Hospital Behavioral Health Consultation Summary. It carried the hospital letterhead. It carried Dr. Priya Nair's typed name. It carried a signature dated April 2nd, 2023. It stated that I had displayed impaired judgment, persistent emotional dysregulation, and diminished executive function following spousal death. I read it 3 times. I had never had a behavioral health consult with Dr. Priya Nair. I had never sat in her office. I had never consented to an evaluation. I knew of her because St. Agnes was not a small universe. She was a psychiatrist on the consult team. I had passed her near elevators. I had once held a door while she carried coffee and a stack of charts. That was all. Naomi watched my face. Have you ever been treated by her? No. Have you ever signed consent for her to evaluate you? No. Were you seen on April 2nd, 3? I looked at the date. April 2. My shift calendar lived in my phone. I opened it. April 2 had been a Sunday. I had worked 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. on the cardiac floor. I had clocked in at 6:48. I had clocked out at 7:41. There was no appointment, no psychiatric consult, no note, no exam. Naomi said, "We need the hospital record." That was where Marcus Reed came in. Marcus was 46. He worked in St. Agnes compliance. He was not my friend before this happened. He was a quiet man with rectangular glasses and a habit of answering questions only after he had read everything. Twice, Naomi subpoenaed the hospital records office. St. Agnes Legal responded first with caution. Then Marcus called me on a Tuesday evening while I was sitting in my car outside the hospital. He said, "Ms. Ward, I cannot discuss everything by phone, but I need to tell you we have no record of that consultation." I gripped the steering wheel. He continued, "We also have reason to believe the letterhead on the affidavit was not generated through our record system." I closed my eyes, not because I was surprised, because hearing it from someone official made my knees feel weak. Marcus said, "Dr. Nair was not on campus on April 2nd, 2023. I opened my eyes. "What?" He said, "She was in Lisbon for the International Psychiatry and Law Symposium. We have travel reimbursement records, conference registration, and badge scan documentation." That was when I understood the signature was not just false. It was impossible. Dr. Priya Nair could not have signed a St. Agnes affidavit in our hospital on April 2nd, 2023, because she was 3,400 miles away in Lisbon, Portugal. Naomi told me later that impossibility mattered. Courts heard denials every day. They heard family conflict every day. They heard grief, anger, confusion, and accusations. But a dated signature beside travel records was different. It did not need to be believed. It only needed to be read. Still, we did not move immediately. That was the hardest part. I wanted to call my father. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to his house and throw the affidavit onto his polished dining table. Naomi told me no. Not yet. I hated those words. Not yet. Not when my pension had been moved. Not when my father had signed my name into helplessness. Not when Peter Voss had attached legal language to stolen hospital letterhead. Not when Malcolm had stayed silent. Naomi said, "If we move too soon, they will call you unstable. They have already built that frame. We break the frame before we enter it." So I documented. I became quiet. I became careful. I stopped calling my father from my cell phone. I sent emails instead. I asked small, precise questions. Please send the full trust document. Please identify the current balance of the Ward Family Protective Trust. Please provide all disbursement records from June 12th onward. He responded with concern. "Elena, this tone worries me. Elena, you are spiraling again. Elena, these demands show why oversight remains necessary." Every answer helped us. Every insult arrived with a timestamp. Every refusal became part of the pattern. Naomi requested the pension administrator's records. The company was called Eastbridge Retirement Services. They sent logs. I read them at Naomi's office under yellow light while rain tapped the window. May 3, 2023, access changed. May 4, 2023. Mailing address updated. May 9, 2023. Beneficiary portal accessed from an IP address registered to Harrison Ward's home office. June 12, 2023. 6/12/480 transferred to Ward Family Protective Trust. June 14, 23. $18,000 disbursed to Harrison Ward for administrative stewardship. July 1, 2023. $9,600 disbursed to Peter Voss Legal Services. July 21, $4,200 disbursed to Ward Holdings for asset review. Ward Holdings was my father's private consulting LLC. I remember staring at that line longest. Ward Holdings. He had charged my stolen pension for the privilege of stealing it. Naomi underlined the disbursements. She said, "This is how we trace control. Money tells the truth after people stop talking." The legal challenge began with an emergency petition to suspend the guardianship. Naomi filed on September 18, 2023. She attached my shift records, bank statements, credit union notes, emails from Harrison, the pension access, logs, and a preliminary statement from St. Agnes Compliance. The first hearing happened in a small courtroom that smelled like dust and printer toner. I sat beside Naomi with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached. Harrison sat across the aisle. Malcolm sat behind him. Peter Voss sat at counsel table with his documents squared perfectly in front of him. My father did not look frightened. He looked offended. That wounded me in a way I was ashamed to admit. Even then, some part of me wanted him to look sorry. He did not. Peter stood first. He told the judge this was a grieving daughter's emotional reaction to necessary family oversight. He said I was a respected nurse but had shown private instability. He said my father had acted reluctantly. He said my pension had been placed in trust to prevent impulsive depletion. He said the family wanted only my safety. Naomi waited. She let him build the same polished house my father had lived in for decades. Then she stood. She did not raise her voice. She said, "Your Honor, this is not a dispute about family concern. This is a dispute about legal authority created through defective notice, a medically unsupported affidavit, and subsequent diversion of $612,480." The judge looked up at the number. Naomi handed up the pension trace summary. She walked through it line by line. May 3, access changed. June 12th, transfer made. June 14th, Harrison paid himself. July 1st, Peter Voss paid. July 21st, Ward Holdings paid. She did not call them thieves. She did not need to. She made the papers speak. The judge suspended further disbursements that day. He ordered full accounting within 10 business days. He ordered St. Agnes to produce records under seal. He did not terminate the guardianship yet. That hurt. But Naomi squeezed my wrist afterward in the hallway. She said, "We stopped the bleeding. Now we prove the wound." I went home that night and sat on my kitchen floor. I did not cry loudly. I did not break things. I just sat there with David's old mug in both hands and understood that I had spent months being legally diminished by people who still expected me to attend Thanksgiving. Then Malcolm came to see me. It was October 4th, 2023. I knew the date because I had just finished a night shift. I was unlocking my apartment door when I saw him standing near the stairwell. He looked older than he had at the hearing. His tie was loosened. His face was gray. He held the black leather briefcase. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered he had signed as successor trustee. I said, "You should not be here." He said, "I know." I said, "Then leave." He did not. He looked down at the briefcase. "Elena, I did not know about the affidavit at first." At first. Those words mattered. I heard Naomi in my head. Dates. Not feelings. I said, "What did you know?" He swallowed. "I knew about the trust." I laughed once. It sounded like a cough. He flinched. "I told myself Dad was protecting you." I said, "No, you told yourself it was easier." He did not deny it. That was the first honest thing he had given me. Then he opened the briefcase. Inside was a small padded envelope. He handed it to me. My name was written on the front. Elena, his handwriting. Inside was a thumb drive, blue plastic, cheap. Ordinary. It could have held vacation photos. It could have held tax forms. Instead, it held my father's voice. Malcolm said, "I recorded a meeting with Dad and Peter on March 10th. I thought I might need to protect myself. There it was. Not protect me. Protect himself. Even his guilt had a beneficiary. I said nothing. Malcolm continued. Peter was nervous about notice. Dad told him not to make it complicated. I asked, what does that mean? Malcolm looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes were wet. It means he knew you would fight. I took the thumb drive. I did not invite him in. I did not thank him. I said, send Naomi everything. He nodded. Then he said, I am sorry. I waited for that sentence to mean something. It did not. Maybe because it came after the pension. Maybe because it came after the affidavit. Maybe because he had needed his own danger before my harm became real. I said, be sorry under oath. Then I closed the door. Naomi had the thumb drive forensically copied. She brought in an audio technician to preserve the metadata. The recording was clear enough. Not perfect, but clear. The meeting had taken place in Harrison Ward's home office on March 10, 2023, 4 days before the guardianship petition. I listened to it in Naomi's conference room with the blinds half closed. My father's voice came first, smooth, impatient. Elena cannot be allowed to get sentimental with that money. Then Peter Voss. Harrison, without a current evaluation, the petition is vulnerable. My father again. She is a nurse. She knows how to look functional. That does not mean she should control $600,000. Malcolm's voice appeared faintly. Dad, she is working full-time. Harrison said, work is not judgment. Then Peter said, we still need medical support. There was a pause. A chair creaked. Then my father said the sentence that ended whatever daughterly hope I had left. Use the hospital connection. Make it look official. By the time she understands, the funds will already be protected. Protected. That word again. Naomi stopped the playback. The room went quiet. I felt the blood leave my face. I had heard cruelty from my father before. I had heard coldness. I had heard dismissal. But hearing strategy was different. Strategy meant he had not panicked. He had planned. He had not misunderstood. He had chosen. I asked Naomi to play it again. She looked at me carefully. Elena, please. She played it again. By the time she understands, the funds will already be protected. I wrote it down, not because I needed to remember it, because I needed to stop feeling it long enough to use it. That recording became the hinge of the case. Naomi filed an amended petition to terminate the guardianship, restore account control, void the Ward family, protective trust as to my assets, and refer the affidavit for investigation. The court scheduled a full evidentiary hearing for November 29, 2023. But before that hearing, my father's retirement gala arrived. The invitation came on heavy cream paper. I almost threw it away. Then Naomi called. She had received a separate notice from Lionel Price's office. St. Agnes Foundation wanted all board-adjacent disputes kept away from the event. That was how they phrased it. Board-adjacent disputes. As if stolen letterhead and a forged affidavit were impolite weather. Naomi said, you do not have to attend. I looked at the invitation. Harrison Ward Lifetime Service Reception. The Marlowe Grand Ballroom. December 8, 2023. I said, he is going to use it. Naomi was silent. I said, he is going to stand there in front of hospital donors and call me unstable. She said, possibly. I said, then I want witnesses. Naomi did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was measured. If you go, we go with documents. We do not create spectacle. We respond to a public falsehood with a public correction. That became the plan. Not revenge in the way people imagined revenge. No screaming. No wine thrown. No dramatic collapse. Just truth in the room where he believed reputation would protect him. St. Agnes sent one senior administrator to the gala. Her name was Denise Rowland. She was 58. She was the chief administrative officer. I had seen her in board meetings and hallway announcements. She had a calm face that made bad news sound scheduled. Marcus Reed briefed her before the event. Naomi sent a sealed packet to Denise and Lionel Price 2 hours before the reception. It included the affidavit, Dr. Neyer's Lisbon records, the hospital letterhead audit, a statement from Marcus Reed, a preservation notice, and a transcription of the March 10 audio. Naomi told me not to expect courage. Institutions protect themselves first. She was right. But sometimes self-protection and truth stood in the same place for 5 minutes. That was all I needed, so I went, in my nurse uniform, with the sealed envelope in my hand. And my father stood under the gold banners and said, my daughter Elena Ward has struggled since her loss, and I will not apologize for stepping in when she was too unstable to manage money. There it was, the public lie. Clear, witnessed. Recorded by donors holding champagne. I felt the room tilt. Then I stood. Not fast, not shaking. I stood the way I had learned to stand beside hospital beds when families demanded answers no one wanted to. Here. My chair made a small sound against the carpet. Several heads turned. My father saw me. For 1 second, his expression flickered. Not fear, annoyance. He said into the microphone, "Elena, this is not appropriate." I heard a few murmurs. I walked down the side aisle. My shoes were quiet on the carpet. The envelope was in my left hand. My phone was in my right. Naomi stepped from the rear wall. I had not noticed her enter. She wore a dark suit. She carried a slim folder. Malcolm stood near his chair, one hand on the black briefcase. Peter Voss turned toward him sharply. That told me Peter had not expected Malcolm to come armed with guilt. I stopped 20 feet from the stage. I looked at Lionel Price, then at Denise Rowland, then at my father. I said, "You told this room I was unstable and unable to manage money." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. My father smiled faintly. "Elena, sit down." I said no. That was the first time in my adult life I said no to him in public. It did not feel loud. It felt clean. I lifted the envelope. "This is from St. Agnes Hospital Records and Compliance." The room went quiet. Not silent. Rooms like that never became silent. They rustled. They inhaled. They prepared to deny what they hoped they would not have to hear. I continued. "The affidavit used in the guardianship petition against me was dated April 2nd, 2023. I looked toward Denise Rowland. She had already risen from the front table. Her face was pale. I said, "It was signed with Dr. Priya Nair's name." My father's jaw shifted. "Just once." I said Dr. Nair was not at St. Agnes that day. Denise Rowland walked toward the microphone stand. Lionel Price looked confused, then alarmed. Naomi opened her folder and handed Denise a document packet. Denise did not read all of it. She had already read it. She adjusted the microphone. My father reached as if to cover it. Lionel Price stepped between them. That moment mattered. A retired judge, a donor, a man used to rooms making space for him. And Lionel Price placed one hand on the microphone stand and said quietly, "Harrison, step back." My father stared at him. Lionel said again, louder, "Step back." The ballroom shifted. Denise spoke into the microphone. Her voice carried to every table. "I am Denise Rowland, Chief Administrative Officer of St. Agnes Hospital." She paused. "As of this afternoon, St. Agnes has confirmed that the document presented as a behavioral health affidavit regarding Elena Ward was not generated through our medical records system." Someone near the front gasped. Denise continued. "The letterhead used on that document was not authorized for that purpose. Hospital compliance has identified the document as containing stolen institutional letterhead." My father said, "This is highly irregular." Denise did not look at him. She said, "Dr. Priya Nair did not sign that affidavit at St. Agnes on April 2nd, 2023. Then she turned a page. Dr. Nair was in Lisbon, Portugal, attending the International Psychiatry and Law Symposium. The hospital has travel reimbursement, conference registration, and badge scan records confirming her location. The room changed then. I felt it. The admiration did not vanish all at once. It curdled. People began to look from my father to Denise to me to Lionel Price. They were not sure yet what story they were inside, but they knew it was no longer the one printed on the banners. Naomi stepped beside me. She did not take the microphone. She did not need it yet. She looked at Lionel Price. "Mr. Price, my client has been publicly accused of incapacity based on a document St. Agnes has now contradicted." Lionel's face had gone tight. He turned to Harrison. "Harrison, the honorary board program is suspended." My father said, "You cannot be serious." Lionel removed the crystal award from the podium table. It was not dramatic. That made it worse. He lifted it with both hands and passed it to a staff member. Then he took the printed program from the lectern. He closed it. He said into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a brief pause in the evening's program." Then he turned to my father. "Harrison Ward will not continue at this microphone." My father's face hardened. For the first time that night, he looked old. Not frail, just exposed. Peter Voss moved toward the side exit. Malcolm blocked him. Not physically, just by stepping into the aisle with the briefcase in his hand. Peter said, "Malcolm, move." Malcolm said, "You should stay." I had never heard my brother sound like that before. Not brave, not redeemed. Just finished pretending, Naomi nodded to Malcolm. He opened the briefcase. He removed a small speaker and a sealed evidence pouch. Inside, it was the blue thumb drive. Naomi looked at me. I nodded. She turned to Lionel. "Mr. Price, the March 10 recording has been preserved and submitted in pending guardianship litigation. Because Mr. Ward just repeated the false incapacity claim from this microphone, my client is entitled to correct the record." Lionel looked as if he wanted to be anywhere else. Then he looked at Denise. Denise gave a small nod. Lionel said, "Proceed briefly." Naomi connected the speaker to her phone. She did not play the whole recording. She played the part that mattered. My father's voice filled the Marlowe Grand Ballroom. "Elena cannot be allowed to get sentimental with that money." Then Peter Voss. "Harrison, without a current evaluation, the petition is vulnerable." Then my father again. "She is a nurse. She knows how to look functional. That does not mean she should control $600,000. A low murmur passed through the room. Naomi let it continue. Peter's recorded voice said, "We still need medical support." A pause. Then Harrison Ward said, "Use the hospital connection. Make it look official. By the time she understands, the funds will already be protected." The audio stopped. Nothing in that ballroom looked the same afterward. The flowers still smelled sweet. The champagne still caught the light. The banners still said lifetime service. But the lie had lost its shelter. My father did not shout. That would have been easier for people to condemn. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at me with a coldness I recognized from childhood. "You have no idea what you have done." I looked back at him. For once, I did not feel 12. I said, "I know exactly what I stopped." Lionel Price turned to 2 foundation staff members. "Escort Judge Ward to the private reception room." My father said, "I am not being escorted from my own event." Lionel's voice sharpened. "You are being removed from the honorary board program pending investigation." That sentence landed harder than applause ever could. Removed, pending investigation. Public trust had finally met public record. My father looked around the room for rescue. He looked at Lionel. He looked at Denise. He looked at old colleagues. He looked at Malcolm. Then, finally, he looked at me. I had expected rage. What I saw was calculation. Even then, he was measuring exits. A staff member touched his elbow. He pulled away. But he walked. Peter Voss followed him, not toward the exit, but toward damage control. The room stayed frozen until they disappeared behind the side doors. Then sound returned in broken pieces. Whispers. Silverware. A chair scraping. Someone saying, "My God." Someone else saying, "Was that real?" I stood there in my pale blue uniform, holding the envelope that had stopped being just paper. It had become a door, and I had finally walked through it. The court hearing on November 29th had already been scheduled, but after the gala, everything moved faster. St. Agnes filed a formal incident report. Marcus Reed submitted a sworn declaration. Dr. Priya Nair submitted her own affidavit from her attorney. She stated clearly that she had never evaluated me, had never authorized the document, had never signed it, and had been in Lisbon on April 2nd, 2023. She attached her flight itinerary, hotel invoice, conference badge scan, and reimbursement approval dated April 10. Naomi placed those records beside the forged affidavit in court. One page said April 2nd, 2023, St. Agnes Hospital. The next page said April 2nd, 2023, Lisbon, Portugal. Naomi did not dramatize it. She said, "Your Honor, these 2 facts cannot coexist." The judge took off his glasses. He looked at Peter Voss. "Counsel, do you have an explanation?" Peter stood. For once, he did not look smooth. He said, "We are still investigating the origin of the document." Naomi said, "The origin appears in the audio recording. The recording was admitted for limited evidentiary purpose after Malcolm authenticated it." He sat on the witness stand with his hands folded and his face pale. Naomi asked, "Did you record a meeting on March 10th, 2023 with Harrison Ward and Peter Voss?" Malcolm said yes. "Was your sister Elena Ward present?" "No." "Was she notified of that meeting?" "No." "What was discussed?" He looked toward me. I did not help him. He said, "The guardianship petition. The pension funds. How to support the claim that Elena could not manage them." Naomi played the audio. Again. Elena cannot be allowed to get sentimental with that money. She knows how to look functional. Use the hospital connection. Make it look official. By the time she understands, the funds will already be protected. The courtroom did not gasp. Courtrooms were trained not to gasp. But the silence afterward felt like impact. Then Naomi traced the money. She used a chart mounted on an easel. I remembered thinking it looked almost childish, like something from school. Boxes, arrows, dates. But the simplicity made it brutal. Eastbridge Retirement Services to Ward Family Protective Trust. 6 and 12,000 East Ward Family Protective Trust to Harrison Ward. 18,000 Ward Family Protective Trust to Peter Voss Legal Services. 9,600 Ward Family Protective Trust to Ward Holdings. $4,200. Remaining balance frozen by emergency order. Interest accrued. Unauthorized fees flagged. Naomi said, these were not protective disbursements. They were self-dealing payments made from funds belonging to Elena Ward. Harrison's attorney objected. The judge overruled it. Naomi continued. Ms. Ward maintained employment throughout the period of alleged incapacity. She paid rent. She worked 12-hour shifts. She managed patient medications under hospital supervision. She had no documented diagnosis supporting financial incapacity. The single medical affidavit used to obtain authority was forged or fraudulently procured. She paused. Control was obtained through false evidence. The money was then moved. That control must be terminated. I sat there listening to my life be reconstructed from paper. It was strange. Pain had made me feel chaotic. Evidence made me visible. The judge issued his ruling that afternoon. He terminated the guardianship order. He voided Harrison Ward's authority over my finances. He ordered Eastbridge to restore direct control of the pension account to me. He ordered the Ward Family Protective Trust to return the remaining balance plus interest. He ordered Harrison Ward to reimburse all unauthorized disbursements, including administrative fees and Ward Holdings payments. He ordered Peter Voss Legal Services to place the $9,600 in escrow pending disciplinary review. He referred the forged affidavit and the guardianship filings to the district attorney and the state bar. Then he looked at me, not with pity, not with admiration, just with recognition. Ms. Ward, he said, the court finds that you were deprived of notice, property control, and legal standing through materially false representations. Your rights are restored. Your rights are restored. I had thought I would cry. I did not. I just exhaled like I had been underwater for months. Naomi touched my arm. Teresa Collins had taken the morning off to sit behind me. She whispered, there you are. That was when I cried. Not when the judge ruled. Not when the money returned. Not when my father's face turned gray. I cried when Teresa said, there you are, because for so long I had felt erased inside my own name. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in official envelopes, emails, certified letters, board notices, investigative calls. St. Agnes Foundation removed Harrison Ward from its honorary advisory board. The announcement used careful institutional language. Pending review. Document integrity concerns. Breach of donor conduct standards. It did not say he had used stolen letterhead to strip his daughter of financial control. Institutions rarely said the whole truth when a polished version would protect them. But his name came down from the donor wall outside the cardiac wing. I saw the empty space one morning after a night shift. The brass plaque had been removed. 4 pale screw holes remained. I stood there longer than I should have. Not because I wanted to celebrate. Because that wall had once made him look permanent. It turned out even permanent things had screws. Peter Voss resigned from 2 charitable boards. The state bar opened an inquiry. He sent Naomi a letter denying knowledge of any forged document. Naomi read it once and said, that is a letter written for future prosecutors. I did not ask what she thought would happen. By then I had learned that consequences belonged to the process, not my appetite. Malcolm testified. That was part of his agreement with his own attorney. He admitted he knew the guardianship had been filed without proper notice. He admitted he knew the trust was designed to keep me from accessing my pension directly. He denied knowing the affidavit was forged until later. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was not. I stopped needing to know the exact size of his cowardice. Cowardice had already done its work. After court, he called me 7 times. I did not answer. He emailed once. The subject line was, I hope someday. I did not open it for 3 weeks. When I finally did, it was 3 paragraphs of apology, explanation, family history, fear, and regret. He wrote, "I should have protected you." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I replied with one sentence, "You should have respected me." That was all. I did not block him immediately. I thought I owed myself time to decide without pressure. Eventually, I set a boundary through Naomi. All contact had to go through counsel until the financial accounting was complete. Malcolm called that harsh. Naomi said, "Harsh is stealing a pension. This is correspondence protocol." I loved her for that. My father reacted the way powerful men often did when accountability arrived. He called it betrayal. He called it public humiliation. He called it elder disrespect. He called it a daughter's breakdown. He never called it what it was. In January, he sent me a handwritten letter. His handwriting was still elegant. The envelope smelled faintly of his house. Cedar, paper, old leather. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter unopened for nearly an hour. Then I opened it. He wrote, "Elena, you have allowed outsiders to turn you against your family." I stopped there. Outsiders. Naomi was an outsider. Teresa was an outsider. Marcus was an outsider. Denise was an outsider. Dr. Nair was an outsider. The court was an outsider. Everyone who helped me recover my own life became an outsider because my father believed family meant no. Witnesses. I read the rest. He said he had acted from love. He said grief had made me vulnerable. He said I had embarrassed him in front of people who respected him. He said David would have wanted stability. That was the line that made my hands shake. David would have wanted stability. David had wanted me safe. David had wanted me laughing in the kitchen again. David had wanted the pension paperwork done correctly because he knew how hard I worked. David would not have wanted my father using his death as a legal instrument. I folded the letter. I placed it in a clear plastic sleeve, not because I treasured it, because documentation had become a habit that kept me sane. I did not respond. In February, Eastbridge restored my online access. The first time I logged in, my hands trembled. There it was. My name, Elena Ward, primary account holder, no conservatorship notation, no protected account restriction, no trustee override. The balance had not been made whole all at once. The court-ordered reimbursements took time. Interest calculations took time. Escrow took time. But control was mine again. That word mattered more than the number at first. Control. I changed the mailing address. I changed the passwords. I added 2-factor authentication. I named a professional fiduciary as emergency backup instead of family. I updated my beneficiary forms with Naomi present. I signed each page slowly. No yellow tabs. No father's hand covering mine. No one saying only to simplify things. When I left Naomi's office, I sat in my car and laughed. Not happily exactly. More like my body had discovered there was air left. I still worked at St. Agnes. People sometimes asked why I stayed. The truth was simple. My father had used the hospital's name to harm me, but the hospital was also where Teresa watched my hands shake and gave me a lawyer's number. It was where Marcus Reed followed records instead of reputation. It was where Denise Rowland stood at a microphone and said the letterhead was stolen. It was where I had built a life that was mine long before my father tried to file it away. I did not leave because of him. I had already lost enough territory. The first quiet morning after everything settled, I made coffee in David's mug. The apartment was still. No legal documents were spread across the table. No highlighted emails. No account logs. No court dates circled in red. Just coffee. Light through the blinds. My own breathing. Peace felt unfamiliar. For months, my body had prepared for the next strike. A letter. A call. A motion. A message from Malcolm. A new lie. When none came, I did not know what to do with myself. Healing was not cinematic. I did not wake up reborn. I woke up tired. I went to work. I came home. I shredded old duplicate papers. I kept originals in labeled binders. I met Naomi for final accounting. I changed my locks. I bought a small safe. I went to grief counseling for David and betrayal counseling for my father, because those were not the same. Wound. One wound was loss. The other was theft wearing the face of love. I learned to name them separately. That helped. I stopped attending family holidays. At first, that felt like exile. Then Thanksgiving came and I worked a half shift. Teresa brought sweet potato pie in a glass dish. A respiratory therapist named June brought rolls. Marcus Reed passed through with compliance folders and accepted a paper plate. I ate in the break room under fluorescent lights, and nobody asked me to shrink myself for family peace. Nobody called me unstable. Nobody used concern as a leash. I remember thinking, this is not the family table I imagined. Then I remember thinking, maybe that was why it felt honest. The criminal investigation moved slowly. People wanted me to be angry about that. Sometimes I was. But most days, I was too busy rebuilding the ordinary parts of my life. I had spent so long fighting to prove I was competent that ordinary choices started feeling sacred. I chose my groceries. I chose my shifts. I chose my attorney. I chose who knew about my finances. I chose not to answer my father's letters. I chose not to explain my silence to relatives who had believed his speech before hearing my proof. Aunt Lydia called once and said, "You know how your father is?" I said, "Yes, that was the problem." She said, "He is still your father." I said, "And I am still a person." Then I ended the call. My hand shook afterward. Boundaries did not always feel strong while I made them. Sometimes they felt terrifying. Sometimes I cried after enforcing them. Sometimes I questioned whether I had become hard. Then I remembered the guardianship petition. I remembered the forged affidavit. I remembered April 2nd, 2023. I remembered Lisbon. I remembered the audio. Use the hospital connection. Make it look official. By the time she understands, the funds will already be protected. I did understand. Finally. And once I understood, I could not go back to being grateful for my own erasure. The strangest part was how many people wanted a clean ending. They wanted to know whether Harrison apologized. He did not. They wanted to know whether Malcolm and I reconciled. We did not. They wanted to know whether I forgave them. I learned that people asked about forgiveness when accountability made them uncomfortable. Forgiveness sounded gentle. Restitution sounded legal. Boundaries sounded rude. But only one of those things kept me safe. I did not make forgiveness my next assignment. I had been assigned enough. Daughter, widow, protected person, unstable, ungrateful, dramatic, embarrassing. I let those names fall off me one by one. Then I kept the name that had been mine the whole time. Elena Ward, nurse. Widow, account holder, adult woman. Witness to my own life, I did not destroy my family. I exposed what had already been destroying me. There was a difference. For years, I had believed love meant letting certain people hold the pen while they wrote my story. After David died, I was too tired to fight for the pen. My father noticed. He reached for it. He wrote weakness where grief belonged. He wrote incapacity where exhaustion belonged. He wrote protection where control belonged. He wrote trust where theft belonged. Then he expected me to sit quietly while he read it aloud to a ballroom full of witnesses. But I had learned something by then. Documentation could become survival. Dates could become a voice. Records could become a spine. And the truth, when carried carefully enough, could walk into a room that had already chosen the liar. I lost the father I thought I had. I lost the brother I thought would protect me. I lost the fantasy that family would stop before causing permanent harm. But I recovered my rights. I recovered my pension. I recovered my name. And slowly, in ordinary mornings with coffee and quiet, I recovered myself. They called it betrayal when I stopped obeying. I called it survival. For a long time after that, I still woke before dawn. My body had not believed the danger was over. I would hear the furnace click on, or a truck pass outside, and I would reach for my phone. Not to call my father. Not to call Malcolm. To check my accounts. To check my email. To make sure no new filing had appeared under my name. That was what betrayal did. It made peace feel suspicious. It made ordinary silence feel like the room was holding its breath. I had to teach myself that a quiet morning was not a setup. I had to learn that nobody was coming to reinterpret my grief into incompetence again. My attorney told me once that legal restoration was not the same as emotional restoration. At the time, I thought she meant I would still be sad. She meant something deeper. She meant the court could restore access, the bank could restore funds, the hospital could correct records. But nobody could hand me back the version of myself who believed my father's voice meant safety. Nobody could restore the easy trust I had once mistaken for love. I grieved that too. I grieved the woman who had sat in that hospital chair, sleep-deprived and hollow, believing that if she just stayed, polite, everyone would eventually be kind. I wanted to reach back and tell her that politeness was not protection. I wanted to tell her that exhaustion made predators bold. I wanted to tell her that needing help did not make her property, but I could not go back. So I did the next honest thing. I built a life where my own consent mattered. I changed my emergency contacts. I updated every beneficiary form. I froze old lines of credit. I opened a safe deposit box in a branch my family did not use. I kept scanned copies of every important document in 3 separate places. Some people called that paranoia. I called it memory. I had learned the cost of assuming no one would dare. I had learned that a signature could be copied. A doctor's name could be invoked. A widow's sadness could be weaponized. A family reputation could become a curtain hung over a crime. So I stopped trusting curtains. I looked behind them. That habit did not make me bitter. It made me awake. Months later, I saw my father in the grocery store. It was raining that afternoon. I remembered because the floor near the entrance was slick, and someone had placed a yellow caution sign beside the carts. He stood near the pharmacy counter, holding a paper bag with both hands. For one strange second, he looked old to me. Not powerful, not terrifying, just old. He saw me and his face changed, not softened, calculated. He took one step toward me and said, "Elena, this has gone on long enough." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Not, "I am sorry." Not, "I hurt you." Not, "I lied." Just another command dressed as concern. I looked at him and felt my heart pound once. Only once. Then it settled. I said, "It ended when I stopped letting you speak for me." He glanced around, as if witnesses still mattered most. "They have filled your head," he said. I almost laughed, but I did not give him that either. "No," I said. "The records did." He had no answer for that. People like my father could argue with emotion forever. They could call pain irrational. They could call boundaries cruel. They could call memory unstable. But they struggled when paper spoke back. So I walked past him. I bought coffee, eggs, and a small bunch of tulips I did not need. When I got to my car, I sat there for a minute with the rain ticking against the windshield. I waited for the shaking. It never came. That was when I knew something inside me had finally crossed over. Not because I stopped caring. I did care. That was the wound. I cared about people who had treated my care like a weakness to exploit. But caring no longer meant returning. Caring no longer meant answering. Caring no longer meant handing them another key to my life. I drove home with the tulips on the passenger seat, and for the first time in a very long time, my house felt like mine. Not just legally, spiritually. I put the flowers in a chipped blue vase David had bought years before. I stood at the sink and cried quietly. Not because I missed the chaos, because I had survived it. Because survival had not looked the way I thought it would. It had not looked heroic. It had looked like passwords changed at midnight. It had looked like certified mail. It had looked like sitting across from attorneys while my hands went numb. It had looked like learning my own signature again. It had looked like saying no, again and again, until no stopped tasting like guilt. A month later, the final accounting arrived. It came in a thick envelope. Plain white, no drama, no raised voices, no family performance around a table. Just numbers, just dates, just the quiet language of consequence. I sat at my kitchen table. I opened it with a butter knife. I read every page slowly. The recovered funds were not everything. They never were. Some money was gone for good. Some damage could not be itemized. No ledger could calculate lost sleep. No spreadsheet could measure humiliation. No court order could return the years. But the report named what happened. That mattered more than I expected. Misappropriated funds, unauthorized withdrawals, undisclosed transfers, breach of fiduciary duty. Those words looked cold on paper, but to me, they felt like oxygen. Because for years, my family had reduced me to a difficult daughter, an emotional woman, a selfish widow, a person who remembered things wrong. Then the documents said otherwise. The documents said I had been telling the truth. My mother sent one last letter. Not a text, not a voicemail. A letter. Her handwriting still had that careful slant, the one I used to recognize on birthday cards and grocery lists. I held it for a long time before I opened it. I wanted to believe it would be different. That was the last small place where hope still lived. Inside, she wrote that she loved me. Then she wrote that families made mistakes. Then she wrote that I had embarrassed everyone. Then she wrote that my father's health had declined under stress. Then she wrote that forgiveness was my duty. Not once did she write what they had done. Not once did she name the money, the signatures, the lies, the accounts. Not once did she say, "I am sorry I helped him." I folded the letter back up. I put it in the same box as the bank statements, not because it was proof for court, because it was proof for me. It reminded me why distance had to stay. An apology without truth was just another trap. My sister reached out through a cousin. She said she wanted closure. That word made me tired. Closure in my family always meant I had to be quiet so they could feel peaceful. I told my cousin one sentence. "She can write to my attorney." She never did. That told me enough. My life got smaller after that. Then it got deeper. I stopped attending gatherings where my name had been discussed like a problem to solve. I stopped checking social media accounts that only gave me bruises. I stopped asking mutual relatives what people were saying. At first, silence felt like exile. Then it started feeling like shelter. I learned the sound of my own mornings. The kettle clicking off, the floorboards creaking near the hall, the neighbor's dog barking at delivery trucks. Ordinary things became evidence too. Evidence that peace had texture. Evidence that my body could unclench. Evidence that I did not need chaos to prove I belonged somewhere. David's sister visited that spring. She brought lemon bread and a stack of old photographs. We sat on the living room floor with coffee cooling beside us. She did not ask me to forgive anyone. She did not tell me blood was blood. She just handed me a picture of David standing in our half-renovated kitchen covered in drywall dust, smiling like the mess was a promise. I cried then. But it was clean grief. It was not the frantic grief my family had fed on. It was not grief mixed with manipulation. It was just love, with nowhere physical to go. I kept that photograph on the bookshelf by the window, not as a shrine, as a reminder. There had been a life before the betrayal. There would be a life after it too. The legal process ended quietly. No one went to prison. No dramatic final scene unfolded. My father agreed to repayment terms because the alternative was worse. My mother stopped writing. My sister posted vague quotes online about betrayal and loyalty. I let her. For once, I did not defend myself. The people who needed the truth already had it. And the people committed to the lie would not have believed me if I laid every receipt across their hands. That was one of the hardest lessons. Proof could expose a lie. It could not force someone to value the truth. I had to stop arguing with people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I changed my locks again, not because I was afraid, because I liked the ritual. I liked hearing the new bolt slide cleanly. I liked knowing every key had been chosen by me. I refinanced the house under terms I could actually breathe under. I signed those papers on a Thursday. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Not because I was scared, because I understood what it meant. For years, my name had been used, on accounts, on favors, on family stories, on obligations I never agreed to carry. That day, my name belonged to me again. The loan officer slid the final copy across. She said, "Congratulations." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because congratulations felt too small. What I had really done was survive. I walked out with a folder under my arm. No one was waiting in the parking lot. No one called to ruin the moment. No one demanded I explain myself. The sky was gray, the air smelled like wet pavement, and I remember thinking, this was what freedom looked like sometimes. Not fireworks, not applause, just a quiet parking lot, a paid bill, a door I could unlock alone, a life no one else could drain. I used part of the settlement to repair the back porch. David had always hated that porch. He used to say it leaned like it was keeping a secret. The contractor found rot under the boards, more than we expected. I stood there while he showed me. He tapped the soft wood with his boot. He said, "It's good you caught this now." I thought about that sentence for days. It was good I caught this now. The porch, the accounts, the lies, the way love had been made conditional, the way loyalty had been turned into a payment plan. Some damage looked solid until somebody pulled up the first board. Then the whole structure confessed. I did not rebuild it the same way. I chose wider steps, a stronger railing, cedar boards that smelled warm in the sun. I bought 2 chairs and a small table for coffee. The first morning I sat out there, I brought David's mug with me. I did not fill it. I just set it beside mine. For a while, I watched the light move across the yard. I told him I was trying. I told him I was angry. I told him I was sorry for every year I confused endurance with love. The wind moved through the maple tree. No answer came. But I did not feel abandoned. I felt witnessed. That was enough. Months later, my aunt sent me one final message. It was short. "I know more now," she wrote. "I should have asked sooner." I stared at it for a long time. The old version of me would have comforted her. I would have said it was fine. I would have protected her from the weight of her own silence. But I was not that woman anymore. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I am not available to discuss it further." Then I put the phone down. My hands shook afterward. Boundaries did not always feel powerful. Sometimes they felt like withdrawal. Sometimes they felt rude. Sometimes they felt like standing in the middle of a room while every old instinct screamed to make someone else comfortable, but I kept standing there. And little by little, the screaming got quieter. I built new habits. I checked my accounts every Friday. Not obsessively, carefully. I kept documents in labeled folders. I saved emails. I asked questions before signing anything. I stopped apologizing for needing time to think. When someone said, "Don't you trust me?" I learned to answer, "Trust does not cancel clarity." That sentence changed my life. So did another one. No was a complete record when I did not owe testimony. I still missed the idea of them sometimes. I missed the mother I kept trying to earn. I missed the father I thought might someday choose courage. I missed the sister who existed mostly in my memory, before comparison became our family language. But missing someone did not mean they were safe. Grief was not an invitation to reopen the door. That took me the longest to understand. One afternoon, I found an old voicemail from my mother on a backup drive. It was from years before everything collapsed. Her voice sounded sweet, almost tender. She had called to ask if I could cover a bill. At the end, she said, "You're the only one I can count on." I used to hear love in that. That day, I heard the hook. I heard how neatly need had been dressed as affection. I deleted it, not out of hatred, out of mercy for myself. I did not need to keep evidence of every wound forever. Some proof was for court, some proof was for memory, and some proof could be released once the lesson had entered my bones. The last time I saw my parents was by accident. At a garden center in late summer, my mother was holding a small lavender plant in a plastic pot. My father stood beside her, comparing bags of soil. For one strange second, they looked ordinary, not dangerous, not powerful, not mythic. Just older people in comfortable shoes arguing softly over fertilizer. My mother saw me first. Her face changed before her mouth did. I watched recognition move through her. Surprise, calculation, then that old wounded softness. The one that used to pull me back. She said my name like it was a question. My father turned. He looked at me, then looked away first. That told me more than any apology could have. My mother stepped closer. "You look good," she said. I said, "Thank you." There was a silence between us. Not empty, crowded. Every bank statement stood there. Every forged signature. Every meeting where they had called me confused. Every time I had been told I was tearing the family apart by naming what had already been broken. My mother touched the lavender leaves with her thumb. "We've been meaning to call," she said. I almost smiled, but not kindly. I said, "I know." Because I did know. I knew how people like that waited. They waited for grief to soften you. They waited for holidays. They waited for illness. They waited for guilt to ripen. Then they called it reconciliation. My father cleared his throat. "We all made mistakes," he said. There it was. The fog machine. The soft blanket thrown over sharp objects. I looked at him and said, "I did not make the mistake of stealing from myself." His jaw tightened. My mother whispered, "Please don't do this here." And that was when I knew I had truly changed. Because I did not raise my voice. I did not perform the truth for strangers between rose bushes and ceramic planters. I did not need an audience anymore. I said, I'm not doing anything. I'm buying basil. Then I picked up the small herb pot from the table beside me. My hands were steady. My mother's eyes filled, but I did not move toward her. That was the miracle. Not anger, not revenge, not even justice, stillness. She said, I miss my daughter. I said, I miss who I was before I learned the truth. Her face folded then. For a second, I saw how badly she wanted that sentence to become cruelty. Cruelty would have helped her. Cruelty would have made me the villain. But I had only told the truth. My father said, Your mother is trying. I said, Trying is not the same as repairing. He looked at the ground. I paid for the basil and a small bag of potting mix. The cashier asked if I wanted a receipt. I said yes. I almost laughed at that. Of course I wanted the receipt. I took it, folded it once, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I walked to my car. No dramatic exit, no slammed door, no final speech. Just sunlight on the windshield and dirt under my fingernails from touching the plant. I sat in the driver's seat for almost 10 minutes. I did cry then. Not because I wanted them back, because some part of me had finally stopped waiting for them to become different people. That kind of hope died quietly. It did not always announce itself. Sometimes it left while you were loading basil into the passenger seat. After that day, peace became less theoretical. It became practical. It looked like changing my locks without explaining why. It looked like keeping my emergency contact as my friend Marisol. It looked like holidays with people who asked what I wanted to bring, not what I was expected to pay for. It looked like sleeping through the night. It looked like opening mail without my stomach dropping. It looked like answering unknown numbers only when I chose to. It looked like letting my life be boring in the safest way, and boring after years of family chaos felt like wealth. The legal case closed with terms I was not allowed to discuss in detail, but I can say this. The records mattered. The dates mattered. The signatures mattered. The quiet habit of saving what they told me I was imagining mattered more than I can explain. I recovered enough to rebuild without panic. Not everything, never everything. Some losses did not come back with a wire transfer. No settlement returned the years I spent shrinking myself into usefulness. No apology returned the nights I lay awake wondering why love felt like debt. But I got my name back. I got my accounts back. I got my mornings back. And eventually I got my reflection back. For the first time, I looked at myself and did not see the problem. I saw the witness. I saw the woman who had survived the story and then told it clearly. That mattered. If you have ever been told you were too sensitive when you were actually noticing the truth, I want you to understand something. That confusion was not weakness. That ache in your chest was not proof you were wrong. Sometimes your body understood the betrayal before your mind had permission to name it. I used to think proof would make pain disappear. I thought if I could show the document, play the recording, point to the transfer, and line up every date, then the hurt would finally become neat. It did not. Proof did not erase the wound. Proof gave the wound a border. It helped me stop bleeding into every conversation. It helped me stop explaining to people committed to misunderstanding me. And it helped me understand that accountability was not revenge. Accountability was gravity. It was the natural consequence of choices they made while assuming I would stay quiet. For a long time, I carried shame that did not belong to me. I felt embarrassed that I had trusted them. I felt foolish for missing signs other people later called obvious. But the signs were not obvious when they were wrapped in family language. They did not say, "We are using you." They said, "We need you." They did not say, "We are stealing your options." They said, "You are the responsible one." They did not say, "Your pain is convenient to ignore." They said, "Do not make this harder." That was what made it work. The cruelty wore familiar clothes. It sounded like concern. It sounded like tradition. It sounded like sacrifice. And I had been trained to mistake sacrifice for love. I had been trained to feel proud of disappearing. So when I finally stopped, they called me cold. They called me selfish. They called me changed. And they were right about one thing. I had changed. I no longer translated disrespect into obligation. I no longer mistook panic for proof I owed someone access. I no longer believed that being the dependable one meant being available for harm. That transformation did not happen in one clean moment. It happened in small choices. I did not answer one call. I did not send one payment. I did not soften one sentence just to protect their comfort. I read one contract twice. I asked one question out loud. I told one truth without apologizing afterward. Those were not dramatic acts. But they built a life, a quiet life, a protected life, a life where love had to show up as respect or not at all. Marisol once asked me what I missed most. I expected to say I missed the holidays, or the old photos, or the feeling of belonging before I knew the cost. But what came out was different. I told her, I miss who I thought I was when I believed they loved me. She did not correct me. She just sat beside me on my back steps while the basil plant bent in the wind. That was real care. Not fixing. Not minimizing. Not demanding forgiveness on someone else's timeline. Just staying present while I told the truth. I learned that healing was not becoming untouched. I was touched by it. I was changed by it. I still checked bank alerts. I still kept copies in 2 separate places. I still felt my shoulders tighten when a relative name appeared on someone else's screen. But I did not live there anymore. Fear visited. It did not own the house. Some people never understood why I did not reconcile. They wanted the story to end with a hug. They wanted a holiday table, a tearful apology, and everyone agreeing not to discuss the past. But silence was how the past survived. I had already paid too much for everyone else's peace. I was not paying again. Forgiveness, if it came, would be mine to define. It would not be a door they could walk through without repair. It would not be a shortcut around consequences. And it would never again require me to hand my life back to people who had treated it like shared property. The last time my mother wrote, her message was only 4 lines. She said she hoped I was happy now. She said the family was not the same. She said I had made my point. Then she wrote, "You can stop punishing us." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I typed one sentence. I stopped participating. I did not send more. I did not explain the difference between punishment and absence. I did not attach receipts. I did not reopen the courtroom inside my chest. I just sent it. Then I blocked the number. Not out of rage. Out of mercy for myself. That was the part nobody had prepared me for. The end of a toxic family story did not always feel triumphant. Sometimes it felt like standing in a quiet room after a storm had passed. Everything was still wet. Everything was damaged, but nothing was falling anymore. I had to learn how to live without bracing for the next demand. That sounded simple. It was not. For years, my body had mistaken urgency for love. A late-night call meant I was needed. A crisis meant I mattered. A complaint meant I had a job. A guilt trip meant I still belonged. When all of that stopped, the silence felt unnatural. I kept waiting for punishment. I kept waiting for someone to say I had gone too far. But then mornings started arriving without dread attached to them. I made coffee and drank it while it was still hot. I paid my own bills first. I bought groceries without calculating who might need my card later. I took my name off every shared account, every emergency contact, every family subscription, every little invisible hook they had left in my life. Each removal felt small. Each one gave me back a piece of myself. The legal part ended slowly. The emotional part ended slower. There were final notices. There were corrected filings. There were bank letters confirming the accounts were frozen, closed, or transferred out of my reach. There was one last call from my former aunt's husband, who said everyone was tired, and maybe I should be the bigger. Pursoon, I told him, I was the bigger person until there was nothing left of me. Then I hung up. I did not shake afterward. That was how I knew something had changed. Not because I felt nothing. Because I trusted myself more than I feared their disappointment. My sister never apologized. She sent one email through her attorney, carefully worded, empty in all the important places. She regretted the confusion. She hoped for privacy. She denied malicious intent. I read it twice. Then I filed it away with everything else. Not because I needed it anymore. Because I respected the version of me who had survived by keeping proof. My father stayed quiet. That hurt in a different way. I had spent years imagining that if I just showed him enough, he would finally see me clearly. But some people do not fail because they lack information. They fail because truth would cost them comfort. I stopped auditioning for his conscience. That was one of the hardest freedoms I ever earned. Months later, I drove past the old house. I did not plan to. I had taken a wrong turn after an appointment, and suddenly there it was, sitting behind the same uneven hedge with the same cracked walkway and the same porch light that always flickered in winter. For a second, I was 26 again, then 30. Then every age where I had carried bags through that door, carried bills, carried excuses, carried everyone's version of the truth except my own. I pulled over across the street. I let myself look. There was no dramatic feeling, no lightning, no collapse, just a deep, tired sadness. I had loved that house because I thought love lived there, but love had not lived there. Obligation had, fear had, performance had, and sometimes my own hope had stood in the doorway wearing love's clothes. I whispered, "I know now." Then I drove home. My real home. The one with my name on the lease. The one where nobody had keys unless I trusted them. The one where my documents were safe, my sleep was protected, and my phone did not control my breathing. That evening, Marisol came over with soup and a loaf of bread. She did not ask if I was over it. She knew better. She asked, "What did you need today?" I almost cried at the question. Not because it was grand, because it was clean. No trap, no invoice, no future debt hidden inside kindness, just care. I told her I needed to eat, so we ate. That was healing, too. Not the speeches, not the big declarations, the ordinary proof that peace could be repeated. I still had days when grief surprised me. A song in a grocery store, a holiday display, a woman laughing into her phone and saying, "Mom, stop," with the kind of ease I never had. I let those moments hurt. I did not turn them into evidence. I did not turn them into shame. I just let them pass through me. Because losing a family, even a harmful one, was still a loss. But going back would have been losing myself, and I had already done that once. I refused to do it again. What they never understood was that I did not expose them because I wanted revenge. I exposed them because secrecy had become the weapon. Documentation was how I took it away. Boundaries were how I kept it from coming back. And distance became the first honest language I learned. For months, I thought distance meant anger. I thought it meant slamming doors, blocking numbers, refusing every memory. But it became quieter than that. It became choosing not to answer. It became reading a message once, then deciding it did not deserve my body. It became letting holidays happen without me. It became cooking for myself, buying flowers for my own table, replacing emergency with routine, replacing guilt with sleep. I did not become cold. That was what they said. That was what they needed to believe. My mother told relatives I had been poisoned. My sister said I had changed. My uncle said money had made me arrogant. But money had not changed me. Proof had. Silence had. Years of being useful had. And finally seeing the pattern had. I had spent so long thinking peace would arrive when they understood me. But peace arrived when I stopped auditioning for people committed to misunderstanding me. That was the part nobody warned me about. The freedom did not feel glorious at first. It felt empty. It felt like standing in a room after a storm had passed, looking at everything that broke. There were no more crisis calls, no more sudden demands, no more family meetings where I was invited only to pay, no more sweet voices before a request, no more insults after I said no. And without all that noise, I had to meet myself. I had to learn what I liked, what I wanted, what I feared, what I had ignored. I had to learn that rest was not laziness, that privacy was not secrecy, that saying no did not require a courtroom, that love did not have to be earned through exhaustion. Some mornings, I still woke up bracing for punishment. I still checked my phone like bad news lived inside it. Then I remembered. They did not have access anymore. Not to my accounts, not to my home, not to my calendar, not to my conscience. That was not cruelty. That was repair. A year after the hearing, I received one final envelope. It came from my mother's attorney. Inside was a short letter, formal, careful, almost bloodless. It said she wished to pursue a private conversation about family restoration. Not accountability, not repayment, not an apology. Restoration. As if the problem had been distance, as if the damage had been my absence, as if the house had only cracked because I finally walked out of it. I sat with that letter for a long time. I read it twice. Then I placed it beside the first bank statement I had saved, the one with the transfer I had not authorized, the one that started everything. I looked at those two papers together, the beginning and the attempted rewrite, and I understood something with a calmness that frightened me. They still wanted the ending without admitting the plot. They wanted forgiveness without inventory. They wanted access without truth. They wanted the old me back, the one who confused guilt with love, the one who apologized when she was bleeding, the one who carried the family image like it was sacred. But that woman was gone, not dead, not bitter, just free. I wrote one sentence back through my attorney. All future communication must remain legal, written, and necessary. That was all. No speech, no explanation, no invitation. I had spent a lifetime over-explaining my pain to people who benefited from it. I was done making my wounds easy for them to deny. After that, the quiet deepened. Not perfectly, not magically, but honestly, I built a life that did not require witnesses to be real. I kept my records, but I stopped rereading them. I kept my boundaries, but I stopped announcing them. I kept my name, my money, my home, and my peace, and I learned to trust the smallest signs of safety. A friend who accepted no. A room where my shoulders dropped. A meal with no agenda. A phone that stayed silent and did not feel like rejection. I used to think vindication would be the moment everyone admitted I had been right. But vindication became simpler. It was paying my own bills without fear. It was sleeping through the night. It was hearing my own thoughts without their voices climbing over them. It was looking in the mirror and not seeing the family scapegoat. Just myself, bruised, older, clearer, still capable of tenderness, still capable of joy. If you have ever been treated like a resource instead of a person, I hope you say it out loud somewhere. In a journal, to a friend. In the comments, if that is the only place that feels safe today. Because naming it matters. Documentation matters. Boundaries matter. And if this story stayed with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember that being exhausted is not proof of devotion. Sometimes it was proof of being used. I wished someone had told me that sooner. I wished someone had looked at me when I was still defending them and said, "You are allowed to count the cost." Because I had been taught that counting the cost was selfish. I had been taught that love meant absorbing damage quietly. I had been taught that family loyalty meant staying available even after respect had disappeared. But I learned the truth slowly. Love did not require financial confusion. Love did not require secret accounts. Love did not require forged signatures, missing statements, edited stories, or apologies that sounded like invoices. Love did not require me to set myself on fire so everyone else could call the room warm. For a long time, I grieved the family I thought I had. I grieved the version of my mother I kept trying to earn. I grieved the brother who smiled in photographs and disappeared when accountability arrived. I grieved the relatives who said they did not want to take sides, even while standing comfortably on theirs. I grieved the holidays I had mistaken for belonging. I grieved the table, the house, the rituals, the old jokes, the familiar dishes, the sound of voices I once thought meant home. That grief was real. Even after everything, I did not pretend it was easy. Freedom still hurt at first. Peace still felt unfamiliar. Some mornings I woke up with the old panic, reaching for my phone before I remembered nobody was allowed to demand my day anymore. Some nights I wondered if I had been too harsh. Then I would remember the documents. Not because I wanted to stay angry, because truth protected me when guilt tried to rewrite history. I remembered the dates. I remembered the transfer. I remembered the account. I remembered the meeting where my name had been spoken like it belonged to them. I remembered the signatures that were not mine. I remembered the way they called me dramatic before they knew I had proof. And I remembered something else, too. I remembered myself. I remembered how many chances I gave. I remembered how softly I asked. I remembered how carefully I tried to keep the family from breaking. I remembered that I did not leave first. I left last. I left after the lying. I left after the stealing. I left after the gaslighting. I left after the apology that did not name a single thing. That mattered, because people like that always wanted to start the story at the moment you finally protected yourself. They did not want to talk about what made protection necessary. They wanted my boundary to look like cruelty. They wanted my silence to look like pride. They wanted my absence to look like punishment. But I knew better. My absence was evidence. It proved I had finally understood that access to me was not automatic. It had to be earned. It had to be safe. It had to be honest. And if honesty destroyed the relationship, then honesty was not the thing that destroyed it. The lie was. I carried that lesson into every part of my life afterward. I stopped explaining my no like I was applying for permission. I stopped accepting panic as a normal form of love. I stopped mistaking intensity for closeness. I stopped shrinking my needs so other people could stay comfortable. I became harder to manipulate, but not harder to love. That distinction saved me, because I used to fear that boundaries would make me cold. They did not. They made me warmer in the places where warmth was safe. They made me more generous with people who did not treat generosity like an unlocked door. They made me more honest, more present, more alive. The strange part was, once I stopped begging my family to see my worth, I started seeing it myself. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic mirror moment. It happened quietly. It happened when I signed a lease with my own steady hand. It happened when I opened mail without dread. It happened when I bought groceries and did not calculate what emergency they might create next. It happened when I laughed without checking the room. It happened when I realized I had gone an entire week without rehearsing an argument with someone who was never listening. That was healing. Not forgetting, not excusing, not becoming untouched. Healing was when the past stopped driving every room I entered. I still kept copies of everything that mattered. I still kept my attorney's number. I still kept my accounts locked, my passwords changed, my credit monitored, and my boundaries written plainly. But I no longer lived with my back against the door. And that felt like a miracle I had built with my own hands. So if you had ever sat in your car outside your own home, trying to gather enough strength to walk through the door, I understood. That, if you had ever deleted a message because answering felt dangerous, I understood that too. If you had ever been called selfish for refusing to be drained, I wanted you to know that word did not belong to you. It belonged to the people who benefited from your exhaustion. I learned that slowly. I learned it through bank statements, through locked accounts, through legal letters, through nights when my phone lit up and my whole body still reacted before my mind did. I learned it every time someone said, "But they're still your family." And I had to remind myself that family was not a license to steal peace. Family was not a blank check. Family was not an excuse to rewrite history until the wounded person looked like the villain. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant access. I thought if I truly healed, I would have to open the door again. I thought peace would prove itself by letting them back in. But that was another lie I had inherited. Forgiveness, for me, was not a reunion. It was not a holiday table. It was not a smiling photo posted for people who never knew the truth. Forgiveness was the day I stopped carrying their version of me like a sentence. It was the day I let them be wrong about me without rushing to correct them. It was the day I understood that my life did not need to be a courtroom forever. I had already presented the evidence. I had already told the truth. I had already survived what they insisted never happened. After that, I was allowed to live. I was allowed to rest. I was allowed to build something that did not require constant defense. Some people never apologized. Some people apologized in ways that protected themselves. Some people acted wounded that I had proof. Not that I had been hurt. Not that money had been moved. Not that signatures had been forged. Not that my name had been used without my consent. They were upset that I could prove it. That told me everything. Because remorse sounded different. Remorse did not demand silence. Remorse did not rush the injured person back into service. Remorse did not say, "Can we just move on?" before naming what happened. Remorse made room for the damage. They never made room. So I made room for myself. I made room in my mornings. I made room in my budget. I made room in my friendships. I made room in my own mind, where their voices used to take up every corner. I stopped treating calm like a temporary accident. I stopped waiting for the next crisis to prove I was still needed. That was one of the hardest parts. I had built so much of my identity around being useful. I had confused usefulness with belonging. I had confused being called in an emergency with being loved. But love did not only appear when someone needed saving. Love stayed after the crisis. Love asked questions. Love remembered details. Love respected no. Love did not punish independence. Once I learned that, I could not unlearn it. I could not go back to begging for crumbs from people who had eaten from my hands for years. I could grieve them. I did grieve them. I grieved the mother I wished I had. I grieved the sibling I kept trying to protect. I grieved the family story I had repeated because the truth felt too lonely. But grief was not a command to return. It was proof that something mattered once. It was not proof that it was safe now. If you had lived anything like that, I hoped you stopped calling yourself dramatic. I hoped you stopped apologizing for noticing patterns. I hoped you trusted the part of you that flinched when everyone else smiled. Sometimes your body kept records before your mind was ready to read them. And when you finally did read them, I hoped you did not look away. I hoped you saved the messages. I hoped you checked the dates. I hoped you asked for copies. I hoped you told one safe person. I hoped you believed that documentation was not bitterness. Sometimes it was survival. Sometimes it was the bridge between being dismissed and being free. And if this story stayed with you, I hoped you carried it gently. Not as fear, not as suspicion toward everyone who loved you, but as permission. Permission to ask questions. Permission to protect your name. Permission to lock the door. Permission to stop funding your own erasure. If you had ever been treated like a resource instead of a person, you could say that out loud. You could leave it in the comments if you were ready. You could write the first moment you realized it. You could write the sentence they used to keep you small. You could write the bill, the favor, the silence, the inheritance, the account, the apology that never came. And if you were not ready, that was all right too. I learned that healing did not demand a public announcement. Sometimes healing was quiet. Sometimes it looked like not answering the phone. Sometimes it looked like reading the message twice, then choosing not to explain myself. Sometimes it looked like making dinner in a silent kitchen and realizing silence no longer scared me. For a long time, silence had meant punishment. Silence had meant someone was angry. Silence had meant I needed to scan the room, fix the mood, offer money, offer labor, offer myself. After I left, silence became something else. It became space. It became air. It became proof that no crisis was waiting behind every closed door. I did not become cold. That was what they predicted. They said I would harden. They said I would regret it. They said I would miss my family when life got difficult. And life did get difficult. There were nights when I sat on my couch with my phone face down because I knew one message could pull me back into the old version of myself. There were holidays when I drove past houses glowing with warm windows and felt the ache of what I had wanted. There were ordinary Sundays when I missed the idea of being able to call my mother and tell her good news. But missing something did not make it healthy. Loneliness did not make them safe. Memory did not erase evidence. That was the sentence I kept coming back to. Memory did not erase evidence. I had the bank statements. I had the emails. I had the changed forms. I had the recorded admission. I had the timeline I built when my hands were still shaking. And more than anything, I had my own life back. That was the part they never understood. They thought the worst thing they could take from me was money. They thought the worst thing they could do was embarrass me, exclude me, rewrite me, make me look ungrateful. But the worst thing they had taken was my trust in myself. And that was what I fought to recover. Not their approval, not their regret, not some perfect apology where everyone finally admitted what they had done. I fought for the quiet ability to hear my own thoughts without their voices interrupting me. I fought to believe my memory even when they called it resentment. I fought to believe my boundaries even when they called them cruelty. I fought to believe my exhaustion even when they called it selfishness. And slowly I came back to myself. Not all at once, not in some dramatic sunrise moment. It happened in receipts. It happened in blocked numbers. It happened in therapy notes. It happened in new passwords. It happened in a lease with only my name on it. It happened in a bank account no one else could touch. It happened in the first full month when I did not send money to fix a problem I did not create. I remembered that month clearly. I opened my banking app on the last day and stared at the balance. It was not a fortune. It was just enough. Rent was paid, groceries were covered, the lights were on. No one had guilted me into draining it. No emergency had swallowed it. No one had called me selfish for keeping what I earned. I sat there at my kitchen table and cried harder than I expected. Not because I was sad, Because I finally understood how long I had lived without feeling safe. Safety felt strange at first. It felt almost suspicious. Then it felt sacred. That was the after. Not revenge as a slammed door, not revenge as a ruined life. The real consequence was that they lost access to someone they had mistaken for a permanent resource. They lost my labor. They lost my silence. They lost the version of me who would rather be hurt than be called difficult. And I lost something too. I lost the fantasy that if I gave enough, they would become gentle. I lost the habit of translating disrespect into stress. I lost the reflex of taking responsibility for every adult who refused responsibility for themselves. Those losses hurt. Then they freed me. I did not need them to become villains for me to walk away. I only needed to stop pretending their choices had not happened. I only needed to stop turning my pain into evidence against myself. So if you recognized yourself in any part of this, I hoped you heard me clearly. You were allowed to protect your records. You were allowed to save your messages. You were allowed to check the numbers. You were allowed to ask for proof. You were allowed to stop answering calls that only came with demands. I wished someone had told me that sooner, because for years I had treated suspicion like a moral failure. I had acted as if needing evidence meant I was bitter. I had acted as if naming harm meant I was disloyal. That was how they trained me. Not with one huge betrayal, with 1,000 smaller rewrites. They told me I was too sensitive. They told me I remembered things wrong. They told me I was lucky they still included me, and I believed them long enough to lose myself. I did not lose everything, though. That mattered to me. I kept my job. I kept my lease. I kept the documents. I kept the texts. I kept the version of events that matched the facts. That was the part they never understood. I was not being dramatic. I was collecting my own life back. There were still moments when the old guilt rose up in me. A voicemail would come through and my body would tense before my mind caught up. A familiar number would flash on my screen, and I would feel that old obligation try to wake up. For a while, I had to let those calls go to silence just to prove to myself that nothing terrible happened when I did. Nothing terrible happened. That was the truth. What happened was quieter. I slept better. I ate without a knot in my stomach. I stopped scanning every conversation for the hidden demand. I stopped pre-apologizing for existing. I stopped reaching for forgiveness before anyone had even admitted fault. That silence taught me more than their apologies ever did, because apologies without accountability had always been one more way to pull me back in. A soft voice, a tearful message, a promise to do better. Then the same behavior, dressed up a little cleaner. I was done with that cycle. I did eventually hear through the grapevine that the story had changed again in their version. Of course it had. I had become hard to help. I had become ungrateful. I had become impossible to reach. That was fine with me. I had spent too many years being easy to use. I did not correct every lie. I did not chase every rumor. I did not stand outside their narrative begging to be understood. I had learned the difference between defending myself and volunteering for another round of damage. I chose peace instead, and I will be honest. Peace was not glamorous. It was paperwork. It was budget spreadsheets. It was a locked drawer. It was a calendar full of my own appointments. It was sitting in therapy and saying the ugly part out loud. It was learning that I did not have to earn rest by suffering first. That lesson changed me more than revenge ever could, because revenge, in the way I lived it, was never about making them cry. It was about making reality impossible to deny. It was about letting consequences land where they belonged. It was about refusing to continue a lie that had cost me years of myself. And when the dust settled, I did not feel triumphant every day. Sometimes I felt grief. Sometimes I felt embarrassed by how much I had tolerated. Sometimes I still mourned the family I had wanted. But I no longer confused mourning with obligation. That was the transformation. I did not need them to validate what I lived through. I had lived it. I had documented it. I had survived it. And now I knew that my tenderness did not have to be available for exploitation. If you are still inside a version of this, I wanted to say this plainly. You did not imagine the pattern just because it was easier for others to deny it. You were not cruel for noticing what hurt. You were not selfish for refusing to keep paying for someone else's comfort. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop feeding what is starving you. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it. So if this story found you at the wrong kind of familiar place, I hoped you would leave it with one thing. Keep the record, trust the pattern, believe the version of you that felt unsafe. And when the time comes, choose the life that does not require you to disappear. If you have ever been treated like a resource instead of a person, I would want to hear how you finally saw it. And if this story stayed with you, I hoped you would like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needed the reminder that boundaries were not betrayal. They were protection. I lost the family I kept trying to save, but I found the life I had been postponing. And that life was quiet in the beginning, quiet enough to scare me. Nobody called me at midnight with a manufactured emergency. Nobody demanded access to my paycheck. Nobody reviewed my choices like I was company property. Nobody punished me with silence for saying no. At first, that quiet felt like rejection. Then it started feeling like air. I remembered the first Saturday I did not wake up afraid. I had made coffee. I had opened the window. Rain tapped the sill in that soft, steady way that used to make me anxious, because rain always meant someone might need something. A ride, a payment, a favor, a sacrifice. But that morning, no one needed me, and I did not collapse. I sat there with both hands around the mug, and I cried because my body had finally understood what my mind had been, proving for months. I was safe. Not perfectly, not forever, but enough. Safe enough to stop rehearsing arguments. Safe enough to stop checking my phone. Safe enough to stop explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. That was when healing began to look less like a breakthrough and more like repetition. I paid my bills. I answered my own emails. I went to work. I came home. I locked my door. I slept. I built routines that belonged to me. I bought groceries without calculating what everyone else might take. I made plans without asking permission from voices that no longer had authority. I stopped shrinking before entering rooms. That was not dramatic, but it was freedom. The strange thing was, the proof still mattered, even after the consequences came. I kept copies in 2 secure places, not because I wanted to relive everything, not because I planned another confrontation. I kept them because for years my family had trained me to doubt my own memory. They had taught me that my pain needed witnesses before it counted. So on the days when guilt tried to sound reasonable, I opened one document, one transfer, one email, one signature that should not have existed, one message where they said exactly what they later denied. And I reminded myself that forgiveness was not the same thing as reinstating access. I could release bitterness without returning to danger. I could wish them growth from a locked gate. I could stop carrying hatred without handing them a key. That distinction saved me. Because they did try to rename my boundary. They called it punishment. They called it pride. They called it abandoning family. But I had learned to translate them. Punishment meant I was no longer useful. Pride meant I no longer begged. Abandoning family meant I had stopped abandoning myself. Once I understood that, their words lost weight. Not all at once, but enough. There were still holidays that ached. There were still songs that pulled me backward. There were still ordinary moments that made me miss a version of them that may never have existed. I did not pretend that truth erased longing. It did not. Truth gave longing a place to stand without running my life. I could miss them and still not call. I could love what I hoped for and still accept what happened. I could grieve the empty chair without inviting chaos back to the table. That was the part nobody had prepared me for. The final victory was not the exposure. It was not the legal letters. It was not the stunned silence when the facts became public. The final victory was the morning I realized I had not thought about their approval before making a decision. I had chosen something because I wanted it, because it was good for me, because it fit the life I was building. And no part of me waited for permission. That was when I knew they had lost the only power that ever truly mattered. They had lost the place they occupied inside my head. I did not become cold. I became careful. I did not become cruel. I became honest. I did not stop loving. I stopped offering love as evidence that I deserved decency. Decency was supposed to be the floor, not the prize. I wished I had known that sooner. I wished I had known that being dependable was not supposed to mean being drained. I wished I had known that family loyalty without family accountability was just captivity with better language. But I knew it now. and knowing it changed everything after. I walked differently. I listened to myself sooner. I trusted discomfort as information. I stopped making excuses for people who understood my boundaries perfectly and simply disliked them. Most of all, I stopped confusing peace with loneliness. Peace had space in it, space for sleep, space for laughter, space for friendships that did not come with invoices, space for meals I could enjoy, space for a phone on silent, space for a home that did not feel like a waiting room for the next accusation. I learned that slowly. At first, quiet frightened me. I had been trained to hear quiet as danger. If nobody was yelling, someone was planning. If nobody was asking, someone was resenting. If nobody needed me, I felt useless. That was a hard confession. I had built so much of myself around being necessary. I knew how to solve things. I knew how to anticipate moods. I knew how to make myself small so other people could stay comfortable. I knew how to apologize for injuries I did not cause. But I did not know how to simply exist without proving my right to stay. So I practiced. I practiced saying no without offering 3 paragraphs. I practiced leaving messages unanswered until I was ready. I practiced spending money without hearing their voices calling me selfish. I practiced accepting kindness without searching for the hook. That last one took the longest. When someone helped me and did not bring it up later, I waited. When someone remembered my birthday without needing a favor, I cried after they left. When a friend said, "You do not have to earn dinner," I laughed because I thought she was being dramatic. Then I sat in my car and sobbed into my hands. Because some sentences do not sound revolutionary until you have lived without them. You do not have to earn dinner. You do not have to earn rest. You do not have to earn respect. You do not have to earn your own life. I had spent years submitting receipts for my humanity, and they had still rejected the claim, so I stopped filing it with them. That was the cleanest revenge, not rage, not spectacle, not waiting for them to suffer, just withdrawal, just ownership, just taking my name off every invisible contract they had written without my consent. The legal consequences continued for a while. There were calls from attorneys. There were amended filings. There were corrected statements. There were bank records that had to be reviewed twice. There were relatives who suddenly wanted my side once it became inconvenient to believe theirs. I answered only what was necessary. I stayed factual. I did not decorate the truth. I had learned that truth did not need glitter. It only needed air. And once it had air, people could smell what had been rotting. Some family members apologized. Not all of them. Some apologized carefully, as if the words might cost them money. Some said, "I am sorry you felt excluded." Some said, "I wish we had communicated better." Some said, "Mistakes were made." I knew those phrases. They were little rooms with no doors. Nobody responsible could fit inside them. So I did not move back in. I thanked the few who spoke plainly. The ones who said, "I saw it and stayed quiet." The ones who said, "I benefited from it." The ones who said, "You deserved better from us." Those apologies hurt more because they were real. They did not fix the past, but they did not insult it either. I accepted them without reopening myself as a place to live. That was another lesson. Forgiveness did not require access. An apology did not erase a pattern. Regret was not the same thing as repair. And repair required more than missing the version of me who made life easier. My mother sent one final letter. I read it at my kitchen counter on a rainy Thursday morning. It was 3 pages long, blue ink, perfect handwriting. No return address, though I knew exactly where it came from. She wrote about family. She wrote about memories. She wrote about how painful it was to see private matters handled through lawyers. She wrote that she hoped I would eventually understand how hard things had been for everyone. For everyone. I stared at those 2 words for a long time. Then I folded the letter back along its original creases. I did not respond, not because I had nothing to say, because I had already said it in every document, every boundary, every silence I finally kept. I placed the letter in the same box as the old records, not on my nightstand, not in my purse, not beside my heart. In a box, labeled, stored, contained. That was where the past belonged, not denied, not worshipped, contained. I still had moments when grief came without warning. A smell from an old recipe, a holiday commercial, a stranger's laugh that sounded too familiar. But grief stopped being a command. It became weather, I could notice it. I could prepare for it. I could let it pass without rebuilding my life around it. And on the other side, there was something I had not expected. Quiet. Not dramatic quiet, not lonely quiet, not the kind that punished me. A clean quiet. The kind that let me hear myself. I heard my own needs first. Small ones at first. I wanted fresh sheets. I wanted coffee without checking my phone. I wanted Sundays without dread. I wanted to stop explaining my decisions to people committed to misunderstanding them. Then larger ones came. I wanted honest work. I wanted friendships without performance. I wanted love that did not invoice me later. I wanted a home where peace was not treated like selfishness. So I built that. Slowly. Imperfectly. I made a budget that had only my name on it. I changed every password. I froze what needed freezing. I updated beneficiaries. I signed documents that protected my future from people who had once treated it like a shared family resource. I learned that independence was not one grand announcement. It was 100 boring protections. A new lock, a separate account, a saved email, a lawyer's file, a boundary in writing, a phone call not answered, a holiday spent elsewhere, a sentence repeated calmly. No, that does not work for me. At first, saying it felt cruel. Then it felt awkward. Then it felt honest. Eventually, it felt like breathing. The strangest part was how ordinary my life became. Nobody burst through the door. Nobody needed rescuing every Friday. Nobody turned my paycheck into proof of loyalty. Nobody measured my love by how much discomfort I could absorb. I cooked dinner and ate while it was still warm. I went for walks without rehearsing arguments. I bought a chair because I liked it, not because it was practical for guests who never respected my space. I slept through the night. That one still made me emotional. Because for years I thought exhaustion was adulthood. I thought anxiety was devotion. I thought being available made me good. But I had been trained to confuse depletion with love. Once that training broke, everything looked different. Even the good memories. I did not throw them away. I did not need to. I let them be complicated. There had been birthdays with candles. There had been laughter in kitchens. There had been ordinary afternoons that felt safe at the time. But there had also been ledgers hidden under affection. There had been favoritism dressed as necessity. There had been theft disguised as family help. There had been silence sold to me as peace. Both things were true, and accepting both kept me from running back to the prettier half of the story. That was how I stayed free. Not by hating them every morning. Not by replaying the confrontation until it became my new prison. I stayed free by telling the truth once, then living as if I believed it. The consequences continued without my supervision. Accounts were audited, property records were corrected. Certain relatives stopped speaking to each other when blame needed somewhere to go. My mother's circle became smaller. My brother lost the easy confidence of someone protected by everyone else's silence. My sister sent one message 6 months later. It said, "I hope you're happy now." I looked at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because I was above anger. I was not. I had days when anger came hot and clean and old. But I had learned not every accusation deserved a courtroom. Not every hook deserved my mouth. Some messages were not communication. They were bait. And I had stopped feeding myself to people who called it conversation. My happiness was not the point. My peace was. And peace did not look the way I once imagined. It was not perfect forgiveness. It was not everyone understanding. It was not a family photo with the damage cropped out. It was waking up without waiting for permission. It was choosing who entered my home. It was trusting my own memory. It was knowing that if someone called me dramatic, I could check the documents and remember I had not invented anything. That mattered. Because gaslighting did not end the moment I left. It echoed. It came back in softer voices. Maybe it was not that bad. Maybe I should have handled it privately. Maybe I had embarrassed everyone. Maybe I had gone too far. On those days, I opened the box. Not often. Only when the fog got thick. I looked at the statements, the signatures, the dates, the emails, the notes from my attorney, the copy of the letter where my name had been removed from decisions I had funded. And the fog cleared. Proof became a handrail. It did not make me happy. It kept me steady. That was what documentation did. It did not heal the wound. It stopped people from renaming the knife. If you have ever been treated like a resource instead of became the first honest language I had. I used to think distance meant hatred. I thought it meant failure. I thought it meant I had become cold. But distance gave me something my family never did. It gave me room to hear myself. It gave me mornings where nobody's emergency became my assignment. It gave me evenings where silence did not mean punishment. It gave me birthdays that did not come with demands. It gave me holidays where I did not have to earn peace by swallowing disrespect. I learned that healing was not linear. Some weeks I felt powerful. Some weeks I felt hollow. Some weeks I missed people who had hurt me because my body remembered the familiar before my mind remembered the cost. I did not punish myself for that. I had spent enough years being punished for having feelings. I let missing them exist beside knowing better. That was the hardest maturity I ever learned. Two things could be true. I could love who I wished they had been, and I could protect myself from who they actually were. The legal settlement did not make me whole. The returned money did not erase the humiliation. The apologies that arrived later did not undo the years when they looked me in the face and called me selfish for wanting my own life. But the records mattered. The consequences mattered. The truth being written down somewhere outside my body mattered. For years, I had carried the entire case inside my nervous system. Every contradiction, every missing dollar, every cruel comment wrapped in concern. Every time they said, "You know how your mother is," as if her behavior was weather and my pain was inconvenience. When the truth became documents, I stopped feeling crazy. When other people read it and understood it, I stopped feeling alone. That did not mean everyone believed me. Some relatives chose comfort, some chose access. Some chose the version of the story that let them keep going to Sunday dinner without asking what had been served there. I let them. I had no interest in dragging people toward reality after I had nearly drowned in it. If they wanted the family myth, they could keep it. I had the evidence. I had the scars. I had the life I built after leaving. My mother still sent cards sometimes. No return address, no apology. Just my name written in her careful handwriting, as if neat letters could cover messy harm. The first few times I opened them, they said things like, "Life is short." They said, "I hope you remember family." They said, "I pray your heart softens." They never said, "I lied." They never said, "I used you." They never said, "I let your brother benefit from what I took from you." So eventually, I stopped opening them. I put them in a box with the other things that proved she knew where to find me but still refused to meet me in the truth. I did not keep that box because I wanted to suffer. I kept it because sometimes my old guilt tried to revise history. And on those nights, I needed to remember that I had not walked away from accountability. I had walked away from people who demanded forgiveness without repair. My brother tried once more. It was almost a year later. He emailed me from a new address with the subject line, "Can we be adults?" I stared at that sentence for a long time. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so complete. That was always his gift. He could step over a mountain of harm and ask why I was standing in the way. I did not answer quickly. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table. I read the email twice. He wrote that the past had gone too far. He wrote that lawyers had poisoned everything. He wrote that Mom was aging and stress was not good for her. He wrote that I had won, so maybe I could stop now. That line told me he still understood nothing. I had not won because they hurt. I had won because I no longer organized my life around preventing their discomfort. I typed one sentence. "I am not available for a relationship without accountability." Then I sent it. My hands did not shake. That was new. That was the transformation I never saw coming. I had been waiting for them to change so I could finally feel free. But freedom came when I changed my requirement. I stopped needing them to confess before I believed myself. I stopped needing them to understand before I protected myself. I stopped needing their love to prove I was worthy of love. After that, my life became smaller in the best way. Fewer calls, fewer obligations, fewer rooms where I had to disappear to keep. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Tell us in the comments which moment stayed with you. Thanks for staying to the end. We'll see you in the next story.